Welcome, everybody. We are going to talk a little bit about the upcoming yoga immersion. I just want to give you a taste of what we're going to do. Some of you were in last session where we did the joint frame series, and this is where we're going to take the joint frame series and apply it to asana. So we did some of that yesterday in class, and we did a lot of wall work. And so I just wanted to give you a little taste of what that might look like. If you saw the little video that I put online and on Instagram, it was about downward facing dog, utkatasana, and navasana, and what they all have in common. So they're in different positions. One is upside down, one is right side up, and one is standing, but they all have the same elements, which is, anybody want to take a guess from the last training? Hip flexion. Yeah. They all have hip flexion and a lumbar spine pressing forward. And so on one hand, while asanas are giving us so much, they're giving us information on a physical level, energetic level, and a mind level. And that is really what distinguishes yoga from any other physical activity that you're doing. And that's not to say that you only have to be wearing lycra, you only have to be on a mat, you only have to be in a yoga studio or in, in your home to do yoga. Or on Zoom. It is combining those three aspects of what your body's doing, connected to what your mind is doing, and how that affects your energy is what makes an asana an asana. Asana just means seat. And but the asanas were laid out several thousands of years ago as the most effective way of moving your body so that you can have this joining. We now have a whole bunch of different yoga styles, right? We have yoga lattes. I have no idea what that is. We have hot yoga, we have jazzy yoga, we have, there's all these different yogas that in a sense have co-opted the yoga asanas. I haven't taken all of them, so I can't really comment on how they're being taught. But I imagine some of the really fast things, like they're doing yoga asana to Zumba music, isn't necessarily giving people the space to connect their physical body, energetic body, and mind body, in which case they're just borrowing the name yoga. I mean, I'm going to be very blunt and say yoga in the West is a mess. It's really a mess. And but that's what happens when something gets popular. It gets distorted, it gets co-opted, and then, on one hand, it's good that it's exposing people to yoga. On the other hand, it's giving people a very skewed version of what yoga is, and it is in some ways watering down the effectiveness of yoga for many people. Doesn't mean you can't practice yoga with sincerity and the way it was intended to be, but it just makes conversations about yoga with people awkward. And maybe
because once you know better,
once you know better,
it's like you think you're doing it.
Yeah.
But you can't say that.
Yeah, and then some conversations are just like, well, can you put your leg behind your head?
Yeah.
It's like, that's really not what's important about yoga, is whether you put your leg behind your head at some level. But on the other hand, people who are exposed to yoga may eventually rise to a place in their practice, not to put it in a hierarchical way, but it is very basic. It's all about your body. We'll say it's down here because it's dense. Your body is dense. If you start finding the energetic levels of yoga, you've risen a little bit higher than the densification of your body. If you think about your mind, which is actually a little bit more dense sometimes than the energy, you are rising a little bit higher. If you're moving to the intuitive level, you've risen higher because there's not as much form. So in that way, just like a balloon, when it's filled with helium, is going to rise up from the earth, so does our awareness of yoga rise. And I'm not saying necessarily it's better or not, it's just that's movement. It's an upward movement, right? Some people are starting up here and use yoga to bring them back down here because it's an embodiment. It gets you in your body. And wherever we start, if you just think of 5 floors, whatever floor you start on, whatever floor you came into this lifetime being more comfortable with, that's great. But we still want to know what's on every floor. We want to be able to be on every floor and be at home in every floor. And that is really the mastery of a yoga practitioner, is when they can be at home on every floor of this 5-story. You should think of it as a department store. Have you ever been to Macy's in New York City? You're like, And the Christmas sections, the bliss bodies all the way up at the top. You gotta take those wooden escalators. But you go into, you know, if you've been to Macy's a lot, you know what collection is on what floor. If you don't, it's like overwhelming and uncomfortable. If you know where the bathrooms are and that's all you're there for, that's great. But I think they might have moved them actually. I remember last time I was there, I was like, I do not recognize this place at all. I used to spend my lunch breaks there when I worked across the street. Anyway, we want to be on 5 floors. And then I remember going to Macy's in Philadelphia and was like, where are the other floors? It's only 1 floor. Well, that's like how a lot of our lives are, right? We're existing on 1 floor, but if you go to the Macy's in Herald Square, you're like, there's so much more. Is that a fair comparison?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. There's so much more that can be had, and on a material level, but I'm talking about on a spiritual level, if we're just existing on 1 floor, whatever floor it is, even if you're up at this floor, whatever floor it is, you're still missing out on all this other stuff. So our expertise, our mastery is to be able to be at home on every single floor and to be able to easily transverse between the floors. So we're not just stuck on floor 4 or floor 2, or God forbid, floor 1 where they're spraying stuff at you. I think they
No,
stopped
the
that.
basement is the cooking section, so that
I
makes
used to
sense.
love the
as
cellar.
far as
Yes.
the body.
The cellar.
Right. But I was talking about the
You're talking
second
about
floor,
se-
which I
yeah,
think
no.
maybe more be the mind, because I think that's what, not the second floor, the first floor, because that's really the floor where they pull you in. And they
So
do it
mind.
with all of the senses and all these promises of sales and everything. So they catch you with your mind. And that is really where most of us are entering into this world, is through the senses of the mind, through how the senses are communicating with the mind. Anyway, so our attempt at a yoga practice is to be able to introduce ourselves to all the floors, get comfortable and familiar with them. And why I said the yoga in the West is a mess now is because it's all about the first floor, not even the basement, because a lot of the practices are actually quite ungrounding. Right? So like if you've ever been to a yin yoga class, I used to go to yin yoga classes when somebody was teaching them, and I would leave those classes totally zoned out and like incapable of finishing my day. It wasn't necessarily that it was a bad practice. She was a very good teacher. But for me, something else needed to happen. I needed to find some place to ground myself. And so we are all looking for a way to, I forgot why I mentioned the yin yoga thing. Yeah, something else.
About walking into Macy's and getting sprayed.
Getting sprayed. Oh, I was saying that being the physical thing, yeah, about going on the first floor and introducing yoga as a very physical component can also be a very ungrounded. Because if you don't know how to get to the basement, you're missing all the good stuff, including the sale items, right? The cellar. So we do want to know also how to really be grounded. Just because, what I'm trying to say is just because we're using our body doesn't mean it's doing us any good. It may be doing our cardiovascular system good, it may be doing the joints good, although sometimes it can be more harmful than not if we're moving in an incorrect way. So just because we're using our body doesn't mean we're connected with our body. We often will have to go to the second and third floor to understand how to connect with our body through our energy and through the mind. So what we want to do when we're taking an asana, like let's say downward facing dog, we want to know, is this asana putting me in my body? Is it moving energy in a pattern that is beneficial to me? And can I think about what's happening here? Is my mind engaged also? And then maybe we take an asana like Utkatasana and say, okay, am I in my body? Am I in my energy and in my mind? A lot of people will actually find, and maybe you guys have experienced this, that you go into an asana and you're like, you don't even know where you are. You don't know why you're there. Something happened and you missed it. Because that's not familiar to anyone here. You slept through it, right? And this is something that we want to know also. Why did I go blank in that asana? Or why did I get really emotional? Or why did my energy peak? Or why did my energy settle? Or why did my energy get really stirred up? And so as we go through different asanas, this is a question we're asking ourselves, as well as how good am I going to look in a bathing suit if I practice this asana? So we want to look at these asanas and understand why the many levels of who we are responding in that way. I know I've told the story to some of you that had a client once when I was teaching her how to do the joint freeing series. She could not do this movement. And she couldn't do this movement because when she is a cheerleader, go team. She was an overweight cheerleader and she was very uncomfortable in her body and people made fun of her. So as soon as she went like this, all of those experiences came flooding into her and she just started sobbing. Or she was like, I can't, she wouldn't do it. She just would not do it. And it wasn't because she couldn't physically do it, it's because of the emotional and mental component of the pose. And we're not always asked to look at that in our yoga practice and then, no, just do it. Why can't you do it? You're not strong enough, you're not flexible enough, you're not paying enough attention. But there's actually many more interesting reasons than just the ones that are prescribed to us by somebody who hasn't really investigated yoga on all of the levels. Any questions? Comments? Insights?
I used to work across the street from Macy's too.
You did? Where?
Back in the 80s. It was like 33rd Street. And it was in the corner. So I would go to Macy's all the time.
Macy's and Woolworths, right?
But
Woolworths?
and Woolworths for lunch.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that was like the best.
And to go get the as seen on TV stuff that you shouldn't have been buying. Right? Like, I so need that steamer. I got suckered in all the time. And if I didn't get it, I would just think about it the whole
Right?
afternoon, like, why didn't I get that steamer? Yeah. You've been there. Were you standing next to me? You're like, I'll take it. I'm like, what? She took it. She took the last steamer. I worked at the Empire State Building. So I was
yes.
between Woolworths and Macy's.
Yes.
Yeah, I had to go up. Yeah, I had to go uptown. I mean, I had to go west a bit. All right, so we're gonna, the pose that I find really demonstrates this idea of the mind-body connection is cat and dog tilt. And I think even if you've done it with me before, it's still fun to do it again, right? So we're gonna get on our hands and knees for cat and dog tilt. So take a blanket under your knees if you want, set your hands up, however you want to do it. And then I want you to just start doing it, just like you might normally do it, just as, you know, any of the ways you do it. And even if you know what I'm going to do, see if you can do it as, yeah, see, go ahead and go into what you think I might be telling you and see how effective it is for you. So cat and dog tilt, following your own breath, making your movements as you like. Now, what I'd like you to do, now that you've been doing it for a little bit, I'd like you to think about what are you feeling in your body? First of all, what are you thinking about? Are you connected to the movements right now? If this is the first movement you've done all day other than get here, you might be really connected because you might be tight, you might be sore, it just might feel good to move. But I'd like you to ask yourself, how connected are you to these movements right now? And then ask yourself what you're feeling. Specifically, how many places are you feeling these movements in your body? And where you're feeling them. You don't have to know the names of the muscles, but if you do, that's great. You can say them to yourself. But I'd like you to literally have a checklist. Where are you feeling this in your body? That includes, by the way, if you're feeling pain in your knee, your shoulders, your wrists, anything like that. Okay, does everybody have a number? An idea? A number of how many places you're feeling it? Yeah, you know, let's collect data scientifically. Give yourself a number of how many places you're feeling it. It doesn't have to be completely accurate, but get an idea. And along with the number, which is just an easy thing to remember, also where are the places that you're feeling it. Okay, so what'd you find? How many places were you feeling it?
It's 4.
4, where were they?
Here, lumbar, neck, and head.
Your head.
Yeah, like the back,
Oh, you were the,
top of the neck.
okay, okay. 11.
I added pressure on my knees and my arms
Okay,
because that was the first thing that feeling pressure on my body against whatever.
okay.
And then similar to Karen, hips, my lower back muscles along my spine. And then I felt pain in my shoulder, and then my shoulder, oh no, there's pain in my shoulder too, and then, yeah, I don't know, I just kind of lost count. I
Okay.
can't.
I definitely, I mean, the first things I started to notice were my strength, working my abdominals, of course,
Mhm.
and then working my lats.
Up here or down here?
No, actually, yeah,
Okay.
to, pull my shoulders back and, I felt the stretch in my,
Oh, in your feet.
actually in here, because my toes were like this.
Your toes are turned under, okay.
And that's something actually I've never really paid attention to before, but like arthritis, it's popping up here and there, so I think maybe that's why I felt it in my toes.
But you said it felt like a stretch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a
But it
good thing.
just, it's,
Right.
yeah, a good thing, yeah, it's just that, I'm noticing in arthritis that I'm feeling more, when I am stretching those areas, I feel it. It's, not as subtle as it used to be.
Okay.
But the stretching is good.
Okay, got it.
I usually disappear in cat and dog, so I was like noticing that first. Then I go to, so I gave birth in this position, so I go to that sort of automatically and disappear, maybe because I'm just so in that moment. But then I'm like, okay, bring myself back to the body, and I felt in two places, the lats here and then my ankle. And the more I did it, the ankle lessened, and this just stayed.
Okay. Lots.
The lats, yeah, just like a little tweak that
Mhm.
needs to be.
So that's a good example of what I was saying, like you get into a position and then memory comes into you and you may not really go, oh, I know why I disappear in this position. This is where I gave birth. Susie?
Oh, so I did yoga with Sarah.
Oh, okay.
So I'm a little bit warmed up, but I feel no nervous a lot.
Okay.
And then I agree with what you guys were saying, Karen, specifically, I believe in that kind of head. So it's going down.
What part of that?
Just lower.
Lower. Okay. So here's the big reveal about cat and dog tails. You should not feel it in your lower back. And you should not feel it in your neck. And you should not feel it in your wrists. So it's like a misunderstanding that if you're feeling something in your body, for some people this is true. If you're feeling anything in your body, that's a good sign. But now you want to know, am I feeling it in the right place? Okay? Because you can cook anything, right? But is it edible? And then is it nutritious? Right? Does it taste good? And then is it nutritious? And is it something you're going to want to eat again? So we're going to do cat and dog tilt again. And those of you who felt it in your wrist, I'm going to ask you to do two modifications. You can choose which one you want to use. You'll see I have these pads here that I keep because I put the heels of my hands on the pads and I let my hands go out. And also, this is so important, so simple, is that you have your wrists forward of your shoulders. So when I have my wrists here, I'm at 90 degrees, and that's more than the wrist. That's more than the natural range of motion. So if you take your wrist forward a little bit and you lessen the angle, they're going to be a little bit more comfortable. If you have, for some people, the wrists are the pressure in the heels of the hands, and if you have something soft under it, that will alleviate that. What you can do is turn your mat under and then put your hands, but remember your fingers are hanging off, the heels of your hands are down. And then the other thing, which is sometimes a little simpler, is, as Deb was doing, to come down like this. Okay, so this is going to take it out of my wrist completely. It actually is going to put it more in where we want it to go, to not have your elbows in place to bend. And then a common thing in cat and dog tails, and I see this in stock pictures of yoga all the time, it drives me crazy. This, we don't want to do this. There's no reason for you to look any further than the front of your mat. There's other places that we can do the neck. We don't have to move the entire body to get the neck. Not that it's bad, but this movement, we want to consider that each of the poses has a therapeutic application. And we'll take, if it's a big movement like cat and dog tails is, why is it big? It's moving your whole spine. It doesn't have to move the neck muscles also, especially if it's causing pain, or if it's distracting you from the bigger thing, right? So it's like you spend a lot of time and money to go to Paris, okay, to see the Olympics. and then you stay in your room and you read a book the whole time, right? It's like, why did you spend all that money to go to Paris during the Olympics if you're going to read a book the whole time and then watch the reruns when you get home? It doesn't make sense, right? So think about these big movements you're doing with the spine. If all you're feeling is your neck and you're doing all this other stuff, there's got to be another reason we're doing that, right?
I don't feel pain necessarily with my wrist. I feel pressure.
You feel
from
pressure.
from my weight.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing. And with my head, I was just noticing.
Yeah.
It's just not,
That's
it wasn't
okay.
painful
Yeah.
either. It was,
Yeah, and that all doesn't just apply to you. And the pressure in the wrist is okay if it's, and it might have been fine. It's like, if like what Deb says, I noticed my hands on the mat, right? Now that's kind of an energetic, more of an energetic thing. It is a physical thing too, but it's energetic in that your mind is now coming to what you're connected to, and that's okay. It's like when you're walking, do you ever feel your feet on the ground? Like, do you pay attention to your feet touching the ground? It's a really nice practice. Like, oh, and now my heel's up, and now my toes are down. And if you're walking in something noisy like gravel and leaves, I'm like, oh, I'm really feeling myself walk. And that's really great. And then also maybe you're walking through the botanical gardens, but all you're noticing is your feet. What about all the flowers? So we can notice our feet and then we can start looking at the flowers. And that's kind of what I would say about this pose. There's so much here to feel that we don't only want to look at our feet, although that's a really great place to start and then to move up. So, and then you want to notice also, like, is the pressure in my wrist distracting? Does it remind me of when I broke my wrist? Does it remind me of this? Maybe it does. And so you want to take that out because that's just a little tiny part of the pose. So that's just some things if your awareness is too much in a place that is not the juice of the pose. And so to use your wrist, and some people aren't able to put their wrist, and it may not be today, but maybe tomorrow arthritis is coming in or the weather is wonky and you don't want to have weight on your wrist, you can always use the blocks. It does not diminish the pose. In fact, as I said,
Like this.
you can do that too. You can do that too, that's fine. And then also I would suggest change it around a little bit. Because if you're doing it like this to prevent any flexion in the wrist whatsoever, you might be limiting your range of motion over time.
Mhm.
If you're doing it because there's a temporary injury, that would be good. Do you know why you're doing it? Because you have bad wrists. Okay. And you may find putting your forearms on the block actually gives you a little bit more freedom to move your shoulders.
Okay.
But you're not always going to have blocks, so then this is great. Or even forearms down on the ground. All right, let's come back into hands and knees. We kind of dog tilt. You can do whatever you'd like with your wrists. So now what we're going to do is we're going to introduce your mind into the pose. So come into a neutral spine. And I'd like it so that your attention is not taken over by your wrists or by your feet. If you feel a stretch in your feet because your toes are pointed behind you, that's great. If it's a lot, then I'll tell you how you can mediate it. And if you want to turn your toes under and get a stretch in your toes, you can do that too. I actually suggest that when you come into dog tilt, you flip your toes under, and then when you come to cat tilt, you point your toes behind you. But if that's taking up too much of your awareness, don't. Okay, come into a neutral position and start to, without moving your back, draw your tailbone down towards your heels. So it's just a little bit of a shift. It's a little energetic shift. You're just taking your tailbone and reaching it towards your heels without moving your back. Does that make sense? Without moving your hips, I should say. That's starting to engage what we call mula bandha, which is a lot of an energetic movement and also a physical movement because it should engage your pelvic floor. Okay, keep your tailbone turned down. Sink the space between your shoulder blades down towards your thumbs without bending your elbows. And this is where if you have your elbows on the blocks, it helps because you can't bend your elbows. So sink your chest down towards your thumbs, then pull your chest forward towards your fingertips and take your lowest ribs in the front and pull them down to the ground too. So what I'm asking you to do is arch your upper back, but keep your tailbone down towards your heels so you're not arching your lower back. And now round, press your back up to the ceiling, and take your tailbone now and pull it towards your nose. Really pull it in and think about pulling your pubic bone up towards your belly button so you're engaging the lowest abdominals. Then push where you think your kidneys might be, push those up to the ceiling. up to the ceiling. And then spread your shoulder blades. So you're still rounding, we're still in the cat tilt, and pull your upper arms away from each other a little bit. So you're using your pectorals a little bit and broadening the space on your upper back. Okay, just feel what you feel there. And then we're gonna go in the opposite direction. Keep your tailbone slightly down towards your heels. Let the belly button drop down to the ground. Then the lowest ribs. Pull your heart center towards your thumbs. Look to the front of your mat. Squeeze your shoulder blades together like you're holding a pencil. Anybody remember what a pencil is? And then pull your armpits down towards your waist. Like you're gonna tuck your armpits into pockets. And then round, pubic bone towards the navel center. Tailbone towards your thumbs. Upper arms press away from each other and just let your head drop. Open your mouth and breathe out through your mouth. And then come the other way. Keep the tailbone tucked under slightly as you drop your belly button forward. Pelvic floor can squeeze. Lowest ribs pull down to the thumbs. Heart center towards your longest finger. Eyes towards the front of your mat. Squeeze your shoulder blades together and pull your armpits down towards your waist. Okay, count how many places you feel this. Keep breathing. Don't hold your breath.
This hurts my shoulders.
Hmm?
My shoulders don't like this.
I didn't hear
My
you.
shoulders don't like this.
What part of them don't like it? They don't like the pulling down? Yeah, try the nose. Is that better? Okay. And then come into the other position, navel center up, pubic bone towards your belly button, upper arms bloom away from each other, your kidneys, which are the lowest part of your rib cage, lift up. Draw your shoulder blades away from your spine and let your head hang. And count how many places you're feeling this. Press your spine to the ceiling as much as you can. Okay, and then come on out. Okay, actually don't come in out. Take a little bit of rest and then I want you to do it by yourself and see how it changed. Yeah, shake out. Did any of the cues not make sense? Or not feel good?
It's just a lot.
Yeah, they made sense.
I
I think I only
I'm
got,
just trying to. It's this one.
Yeah, it is a lot.
Yeah.
Mhm. Just like when you first started driving.
Yeah.
I have to what? And then I have to signal?
Yeah.
And then I have to breathe?
Right.
You have to add your feet. Yeah, I just dropped out the feet.
Okay.
I can't remember what you said, when to.
Yes, which feet, which direction?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's just forget that.
Okay.
So are you feeling contraction when you do breathing in the dog? Are you feeling the contraction between your arms and your?
Yeah.
And
Did
then
you feel that?
And when you're doing the cat, it feels more like a stretch.
Yeah, exactly.
Feel
Exactly. So you are contracting between your shoulder blades and the space between your armpits and your hips. That's your latissimus and your middle trapezius. And then when you're coming into a cat tilt, you're stretching the space between your shoulder blades and you're stretching from your armpits to your waist.
I guess I feel that more in my upper body than I feel anything like that.
Yes.
Feel my legs.
Yeah, your legs are pretty much not doing much at all.
Right.
We want to take it out of the lumbar spine because that is the most flexible place for most people because there's just spine there. There's no ribs, there's no hip bones, and most people are overusing that area in their body. It may not matter now, but it may matter tomorrow or in 10 years. Yeah, that's where you see most disc degeneration and most vertebral problems is in the lower spine because it is so mobile. So are you feeling it in more places?
No, less. This one
Less.
way, it's interesting as I pulled down my, because I was trying to have my shoulder blades come together, but then pulling the armpits down toward my hip, totally just relieve whatever was going on in the
But did
back.
you feel when you were pulling your armpits down to your hip, did that bring up another sensation for you, like latissimus?
It just felt good.
Okay, yeah, okay. So some of us are gonna feel the lats contracting, which go from your armpits down to your sacrum. And some of us won't right away. And then what you also can do is having your tailbone under while you're sinking your chest forward can seem a little like
It's hard, yeah.
But what happened to your mind when you were doing it? Where was your mind?
Starting to look like a Bugs Bunny cartoon.
What does it usually look like?
Something else.
So what I'd like you to do now is do it on your own and just take one or two of the cues that made sense to you, not all of them, one or two of the ones that made sense to you, and try to focus on that and then see what happens with your mind. I didn't ask you what happened to your mind when you were doing the regular ones. Well, I did. I asked you to see how many places you were feeling it. So I did ask you to use your mind. So now you're going to do it again. Just take one or two of the things that made sense, that felt good, that felt different, and then do it on your own. And take your time. It doesn't have to be inhale and exhale for each movement, right? It could be exhale, inhale, exhale in one of the movements until you are settled into it. Yeah, just for wrists, just for feet, just for toes. Keep your elbows soft if your arms are straight. Relax your mouth, no matter where your arms are. Okay, finish up whatever you're doing. How'd it go?
Better.
So you're able to choose just one or two cues.
Mhm.
Where did you feel it?
The change more down here. Still a little confused on the cues for the armpit,
Okay.
but this, the lower spine made sense.
Okay. Mhm. Anybody else? Know something?
My mind thought it was more focused on
Mm-hmm.
reading becomes a little more.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Anybody else?
It was flowing, like, sometimes I think, first time I do a movement, my body has to, like, it's awkward, and then, like, once I do it, like, I remember to do it, and it just becomes more flowing.
So part of what we just experienced, maybe some of you might have experienced, is breaking a habit of how you usually do it. Finding a new pathway and then maybe seeing what is there in that pathway. So maybe for you, Susie, you may have broken a little bit of power. Oh, there's my head, there's my neck, which is what you were noticing in the pressure in my arms. And now you're noticing your breathing, which is it's a more interesting thing in some ways, right? Yeah, it's like going to a different floor, right? Right. And then what you experienced also is a flow of energy, right? It wasn't, oh, my ankle,
Right.
my childbirth, it was like, oh, I'm flowing,
Yeah, I'm
right?
flowing,
So it was the same poses, but with the directions, it was much different experience on it. You went to a different floor. That's what I'm trying to say. So we can take the same pose and just behave differently or use different techniques to experience different ways that pose can be. And who knows what will happen next time you do it, right?
Right, well, it's interesting because when I focus on the body, then it starts to get me to the next floor, and then the next floor. That one's feeling solid.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I noticed.
Yes.
I wasn't focusing on the pain.
So the density of the floor, so you went to the basement, right? And you can't build a building if you don't have a strong foundation, right? You would never, if the first floor or the foundation was weak, they wouldn't build an elevator to the second or third, right? And this is so true with our bodies. If our bodies are not strong containers, then we are going to be so focused on our body, but not in the right way, kind of in a spinning way. Like, how do I connect with my body? How do I how do I do this? How do I do this? How do I do this? And then once we connect with our body, some of us are instantly going to be able to go to the next level or the next level above, because the concern we have about connecting to our body has been resolved. Right. We see this when people addictive personalities, like people who are addicted to extreme sports or to sex or to certain foods. I'm not talking about drugs, because that's something different, but we're addicted to something like that. And it's like an addiction like drugs would create, but it's an addiction like I have to do this again, I have to do this again. Cutting. People who cut, I think people who get a lot of tattoos also, there's an addiction to, I need to get into my body. How can I do this? And I think sex more than anything is what's, and mutilation of some sort. How do I get into my body? And then there's that moment where, oh, I'm here and it feels really good. And then you forget it because that episode is over. Because for a lot of us, our bodies aren't safe. Not safe. We've experienced a lot of trauma in our bodies at one point, in some way or another. So we don't feel comfortable in our bodies. So asana, whatever you just did is getting in the elevator to take you to the basement so that you can go. Like imagine you have to go to the basement first to get the map, the directory of where you're going to go into the other floors. You have to go there first. We are never going to be able to be comfortable in the other floors if we're not comfortable in our bodies. That's why we're here in our bodies, because the bodies are supposed to be the basis for us to expand upwards. And if we can't touch into our bodies, we're just not going to be able to fulfill what our dharma is. That was heavy. In this lifetime. I mean, you're okay. Don't worry. Everybody's doing okay. But so yeah, we can be surprised if we ground into the body first. We don't have to stay there. We just have to remember it's here. I'm okay here. I feel it. Now let's see where else I'm going to go. Just like you rented that Airbnb in Paris. You don't have to stay in the room. Once you know where your room is, isn't that what you guys do if you go travel? You're like, let's check in first.
Yeah.
Make sure that we can get in. Make sure there's actually a room.
Yes.
Let's leave our luggage and then we'll go exploring, right? That's a good technique. Even my husband, who is like the most reckless traveler that I've ever been. Oh my God, such a reckless traveler. But he always says, let's check in first. And I'm like, yes. At least we're in agreement with that. I think somebody's going to say something.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say that it was different. So the first time when I kind of disappeared, because it felt similar in some ways to disappearing, but it was slight, I didn't disappear. I was on a different floor than that last time. So I knew it had a quality that was very, very similar.
Yes, it's such a nuance.
It's a new one.
To know if we're in a top floor, are we there because we chose to be there and we're there really, or are we looking at that level through smoke and mirrors?
Right.
We may be up there, but we can't touch anything. We're like what they call hungry ghosts, right? You're at that level, but you can't quite be in that level fully. Or you're in that level, but you're like, I'm not sure this is a good place for me to be, and then you're always struggling to be up. So there is a nuance, and it's even better that you can't talk about what the difference is, because that means it's real. It was real. Not something you read in the Times or something like that. Okay. Any other questions?
So is this what the immersion is going to be like?
Well, it's going to be like that in that we're gonna pick apart poses. So I will talk about the downward facing dog because I did promise that. So one of the key movements in this was actually I asked you to come out of is hip flexion or dog tilt, where your pelvis is down and your tailbone is up. So when you're doing it in this pose and your belly is falling forward, you have gravity working with you and you're going far down and you can see the curve in my back. Probably in the most flexible part of me. And we're not really engaging any muscles here. We're just kind of like an old glue horse. A horse destined for the glue factory. When we go into downward facing dog, we're going to keep that same angle here in the hips. and then lift up. But for most of us to have the same angle of a deep hip flexion, we're going to keep our knees a little bit bent, because as soon as we straighten, if our hamstrings are tight, this is going to happen. When we're doing hip flexion in Utkatasana, so I'm still in that same dog tilt, when we're doing it here, it's much more strengthening because we don't have gravity pulling us down. We have gravity pulling us down this way, which means our legs have to work to resist that gravitational movement. And most people are going to be able to go pretty far here without bothering this. Although for some people, pulling their tailbone down, like we did in the cat and dog tilt, will be more beneficial. We'll try that. And then going into Navasana, we want to have that same level. And this is going to be the hardest because we're working against gravity. Gravity's trying to pull the arms and the legs down. We can start this way and have even a greater hip flexion. But as soon as we do this, this is probably going to happen. So we want to keep the lower back moving forward, keep the hip flexors going, and see if we can maintain this, and then maybe even straighten the legs. Here, just like in downward facing dog, if your hamstrings are tight, as soon as you straighten the legs, your back is coming up. So let's come into Navasana first. Okay, so you're going to hold your thighs and press your belly button towards your thighs. And think about your tailbone. You can't really move it back because you got a lot of weight on it, but arch your lower back forward and imagine you're pulling your tailbone to the back of your mat. Take your shins parallel. Lift your chest. Think about if you were in Utkatasana, how high your chest would be. And then take your hands away. Now you should feel your hip flexors. Yes?
Yes.
If you feel your abdominals, I want you to think about pushing your spine forward a little bit more. They're going to be working a little bit, but I'd like your psoas to be working more and your back muscles in your lumbar spine to be working more. What if you straighten your legs? What happens to your lower back? Now turn it upside down and come into downward facing dog. You can do the same thing with your wrists. I should say for your wrists. Okay, now everybody come into a high plank. Scoot your feet back. Okay, that's going to be your length for downward facing dog. Keep your toes and your hands where they are and come back into downward facing dog. Okay, bend your knees and come into as deep of a dog tilt as you can. So as deep of hip flexion as you can, your belly button towards your thighs, like when we started in Navasana. Can you feel that? Mm-hmm. And then keep that angle in your hips as you start to straighten your legs and press your heels down to the ground. Notice what happens to the angle of your hip flexion. Probably changed a little bit, right? Go back into the deep hip flexion. So that means bending your knees and taking your heels off the ground. Notice how many places you're feeling it in this pose. How many places you're feeling strength or contraction or stretch. Okay, and then come on out. Okay, so that was hip flexion in three different, because we also did the cat and dog tilt, but I told you not to come into the hip flexion as much. How did it go in the downward facing dog and deep hip flexion? Did it change things? Well, I didn't ask you to do downward facing dog without hip flexion. Do you want to do that instead? Is it too late?
I'm not going to do that.
You're not going to do that?
Danger, danger.
Downward facing dog without hip flexion, yeah, okay. For me, because it bothers you back.
I want my feet were further back than they normally are going to be. So that was more arm strength.
More arm strength. So you felt it in your arm strength. Okay. Anybody else feel more? Did it feel different to you? You were also much longer the second time.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
That's true. Yeah.
A little hard here. Can't be back far, but this.
Yeah.
Like that.
You can go on your forearms actually.
Okay.
Mhm. Did it feel any different aside from your wrists?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Were you working harder?
Yeah, but it felt good.
Okay. How about you guys? notice a difference? Or is that how you always do downward facing dog?
That's how I usually do
And how was the Navasana?
Hard. Hard,
it.
yeah.
I think we all like to have our
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a tricky pose too, because sometimes when that's cued, sometimes that's cued as to contract your abdominals, and they're really not, you're really stretching them. You should be stretching them.
You should
Not-
be lengthening them.
Yeah, yes,
Mhm.
so you're low, so if, not cued here like that, but I have seen it like online, if you look up a pose and they'll say contract your abdominals. So. And
You
that's
could just say
a
anything.
different, yeah, that's, yeah. Yogic journal. What are you talking about? No, but, yeah, that's not uncommon, right? Am I right?
It's not uncommon. I think there's a lot of confusion for all of us about what the abdominal muscles are doing and how we have to keep them strong. But if you think about one thing that's happening when we're sitting like this, and our abdominal muscles may or may not be contracted, but for sure our rib cage is close down to our hips, and so we're sitting like this a lot. And this posture is not great for your internal organs. It's not great for your back, right? To be kind of hunched over like this, and then I'm looking up like this, right? So I'm already in that kind of vulture pose. Now, if we're contracting our abdominals, we are doing that, right? We are essentially doing that. So that would take our Navasana from this to this. And then that's keeping our lower back flat. And the psoas is gonna, if we strengthen the psoas enough, it's gonna pull the lower back forward, and it's gonna keep us in hip flexion, and it's gonna allow us to make this distance. Now, why is this distance important, aside from what I said about internal organs and your back and your neck in that posture? This distance is important because what is this the beginning of? It's the beginning of fetal pose. It's the beginning of it's the beginning of death, right? It's the beginning of death and fetal position, and it is going to trigger, especially if you had to do that in a place where you're scared, it is going to trigger your nervous system saying, oh, we're in fetal pose, okay, let's start secreting those hormones. It may be I'm out of here, or the energy, hormones or the energy, both. I'm out of here, I'm blocking this out, I've dissociated, or I'm starting to have those those chemicals that make me feel scared, because that's why I went into this position in the first place. We've all been in this position, right? Not just sleeping on our bellies, which we were allowed to do, but most things are not, right? So you go into this, you're also falling into a habitual mind loop of being in a vulnerable position of nervousness or danger or something. If we go like this, we are reversing that. The vagus nerve is going right through here, right? So your vagus nerve wants to be like this to be in its optimal functionality, as do your internal organs, not like this. The diaphragm is not working as efficiently, can't push down the internal organs to move them forward like it can when you're like this. So it's a lot of reasons for us to practice this over this. And then, of course, the more we contract our abdominal muscles and strengthen our abdominal muscles, for most of us, the weaker our psoas is going to get. And that's not a good thing, which we don't have time to get into, because I can talk about that for days. So if we work on strengthening our psoas and let our belly, we may find that our habitual tension pattern will start to shift, and that will be good for us. That lets us go into a different floor. We don't have to hover in the basement. Yeah. Suck in your belly. Okay, again. I spend my whole day sucking my belly, and I have to do it now when I'm in yoga. So in addition to taking apart those poses and seeing the connection between them, we're also going to look at the connection between hip flexion. Which hip flexor is weaker on you? Is it weaker for you to sit upright and do this than it is for you to slouch and do this? If you take your lower back forward, so you're using your psoas also. Is one side harder? Are you compensating? Right? That's going to affect your downward facing dog, your Navasana, and your chair pose if you're doing it asymmetrically. Is it different to do hip flexion like this? With your lower back forward. Is it different to do hip flexion like that? Should be.
It's easy.
It's easier. And how about hip flexion like this? With your lower back forward. Now you're working into being stronger in Navasana. You can put your foot down. And down. With your lower back forward, which was translated into you being able to be like this one day instead of like this. And then how do we stretch our hip flexors? Right? So now that you've used them, and actually the most important thing, I think one of the most important things is what you just felt. Is that a stretch or is that a contraction? What does that feel like? There's nuanced differences between what a stretch feels like. I like to say what it tastes like. What does a stretch taste like versus what a contraction tastes like? So what you were doing was just contraction. If you felt it in your hip flexors, you were contracting your hip flexors because you're bringing the bone to a bone. And then if you come this way and you come into a low lunge, now you're feeling it stretch, which I recommend you doing because you just contracted your hip flexors a lot. Stretch versus contraction is really setting up the energy in a different way, and it's sending up your mind in a different way. Stretching means something much different than getting your muscles strong, doesn't it? Just in your own thought processes. You think you have to stretch? You think you need to stretch? You're just everything about you set up differently than if you have to contract and get strong. If you feel like you can't get strong, then what may happen in your body is it goes back down to the basement to hover in a corner, not to hover, to huddle in a corner. And if you feel like you can't stretch your body, you're stuck in the elevator. Which, as somebody who got stuck in the elevator a lot as a little girl, it's not fun. I grew up on the 23rd floor. Elevators were about a third of my life. I spent a third sleeping, a third eating, a third in the elevators, and then outside.
I would dress my children in the elevator.
Oh, what a
Get
great
them out the door. I'm
idea!
like, come on, we'll go with you.
I could have learned a new language in the elevator if I had Duolingo back then. Okay, can you feel that? Can you taste the difference between the stretch and the strengthening, the contraction?
Yeah.
I think that's such, and those of you who've done the training for it now, I think that is such an important thing that we know if we're stretching or strengthening a muscle, it is a different activity, different attitude, different approach, different energetic and mental components to whether you need to strengthen or stretch a muscle. And then if we put in there also release a muscle, then we have even more possibilities for things that we can do. Release always just flows you right up to Christmas land in Macy's. Santa! You always go to the good place in a release and get to pass go and collect $200. So what we're really looking for in our yoga practice is a release. But the stretch and the strength and the strengthening will get there. Questions?
So is the schedule online? It is. Okay. I'll look at it.
Yeah, it's going to be Saturdays and Sundays from the very beginning of October to I think maybe the end of November. It's not going to be every weekend. Sometimes it's going to be a Saturday or a Sunday or a Saturday and a Sunday. All classes are going to be recorded just as we're recording this one, so you don't miss anything that happens without access to everything.
So it's early October it starts.
Yeah. It was late October, but then it was middle October, but then I planned a trip.
Okay.
So I
that's
kind of
what I
bumped some
thought.
up.
Okay, I'll just have
Yeah,
to
so if
follow.
you looked at the schedule a while ago, it has
That's what I-
changed.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Mhm.
Will you be doing meditation?
Yeah, we do open up with a meditation all the time. What do you mean, will I be teaching meditation?
Yeah.
No,
Practicing in the.
we'll be doing some practices, but it is really mostly about how we're using asana as a vehicle for shifting You may find that doing certain asanas will promote a better meditation. We can certainly talk about that too. And we'll talk a lot about what's going on in your energetic body and your mental body and your wisdom body as you're doing these things that are happening in your physical body. So we're really looking at like you can think about it like driver's ed and also car repair. It's like you're not just learning how to drive your car, you're learning about your car and how to modify for it and what's the best gasoline to put in it or and all those things. Because this is the vehicle that's going to take you to a more engaged meditation. Yeah, and we all should be practicing on some level of meditation, but it's almost like you know, if you drive a stick shift, which I'm sure you. I misread you. No, I thought you did.
I never learned.
Oh, okay. Well, if you drive, does anybody drive a stick shift?
Not anymore, but I
Can,
did.
but I,
Okay. Well, you may remember, or a bicycle, right? You remember you're driving and you have to know when to shift. You probably hear it, right? You have to know when to shift. If you don't have to shift, like my son's like, why should I shift at a second? I'm just going to have to go back. Okay, that's one way of looking at it.
That's torture.
Burn out the gears.
Yeah. I think we were just going between Milford and Frenchtown. Maybe it was third. Yes. So when are we shifting, and when we shift, what is it giving us? Right.
Relief.
So like when you said, oh, that's terrible. It's like if you're on the highway in second gear, you know, everything is going to be like, and then you shift into fifth gear and you're like, so that's kind of, we want to see how are we going to also shift our bodies so that when we sit down for meditation, it's not like, or like that experience I had in yin yoga. You know, I could have sat there completely blanked out, but it wasn't going to come out of that going, that was an amazing meditation. It's going to be like, where am I? Am I still in Macy's? I think I'm in Bloomingdale's, which I never went to. So think about it as like we're looking at the posture for meditation. And some poses, I mean, honestly, can be quite meditative. You know, there's some poses, I don't know if any of you have a pose that, like, you know, if you need to just calm down and go into that pose. Does anybody have a pose like that? Or when you're in a class, you come into, you're just like, oh.
Child's pose.
Child's pose?
I
Yeah.
like downward facing.
Yeah, for me, it's downward facing dog and now triangle.
Baddha-Konasana.
Baddha-Konasana. Yeah. I've also had like shoulder stand has been it for a while. Yeah.
Pigeon.
Pigeon pose. Yeah. So you can get into a meditative state in some of these poses, right? And it's good that all of you had an answer. That's great because some people are just like, I don't like this pose or I like this pose. Why don't you like this pose? And why do you like this pose? And if the answer is I don't like this pose because I can't do it, everybody can do every pose. They just may have to do it differently. And so that's another thing we're going to look at. How can your body, so she says pigeon, some people are like, oh, pigeon. But she could do pigeon different. I could do pigeon differently, so I can be as meditative as her. I mean, maybe not. It's her pose. And we're usually not going around saying, what's the pose that you're the most sattvic in? Like
It's
that's
funny because I often don't want to say it because of that reaction other people have. So I'm always like, should I say pigeon? I thought it was safe here that I could tell you.
I also love pigeon, so
Me too.
yeah. And I'm happy that my knee is good enough that I can do pigeon on this side now. Just yesterday.
I'm sure my pigeon doesn't look anything like yours, but I love
Yeah,
pigeon
but it
too.
doesn't matter, right? That's the thing
Exactly.
also. That's another, not, and I know you don't have that mistaken idea, but it's a mistaken idea that other people have, that we have to look a certain way with like yoga journal in order for the pose to be right. But that's so not true. You need to feel inside of yourself, what's my body doing? What's my mind doing? What's my energy doing? You can say, it's such a good stretch for my body, but I'm afraid I'm going to pop out my kneecap. All right, then it's not a great pose for your energy or your mental well-being. Because every time the teacher says we're coming to pigeon, you're going to be, okay. So we want to get a sense of how these poses are interacting with us. That will change, you know, because our bodies are changing. So there's so much to learn from a pose, from one pose. Remember when you were little and they say, if you were on a desert island What's the one piece of makeup you'd want to have?
What's the one?
You never had that?
No?
Makeup,
Makeup?
Yeah, when I was like
I've never heard.
in my
of
early teens.
No,
It was food.
I wouldn't worry about makeup.
It was always.
I like getting off of here.
But I've never heard of makeup.
Yeah,
Mine
we
would be
used to do
lipstick.
makeup. You used to do what?
Lipstick.
Yeah,
Lipstick.
No mascara.
Yeah, see, that's just the whole thing, you know, it's
Yeah,
not you're
everybody has a
actually
different-
gonna be on a desert island with a piece of, it's just like, if you were, what is the thing that you need to survive, right?
Yeah.
So lipstick and, yeah, lipstick, you could use lipstick as blush and
Oh.
eyeshadow, right? And
Oh, gosh.
so you could use down pigeon for, you know, your hip or for your energy or for your mind or to clear emotions or to cry. Pigeon is such a safe pose to cry in because your face is down, right? And not only that, you're working your hips, so you're opening things up, and it's possible that you are going to cry in pigeon. It just happens to be that your face is also going to be down. So that's not why your face is down, it just happens to be that way. So there's just what I was trying to bring out is there's just so much in one pose that can be explored on so many different floors. So that's what we're going to talk about.
And the poses that you pick are the ones in Makunda's book,
They'll most
Yeah.
likely come from the Structural Yoga 24, yeah. Because then we can also reference them to the joint frame series to see, just like I had you do this, which of your hip flexors is stronger. And then the most brilliant thing about the joint frame series is the test is the cure. So if you test and you're like, oh, it's weak, what do I do? You do that, right? And then those of you who have a good working knowledge of anatomy will also know, oh yeah, sartorius, rectus femoris, psoas, all of that. So you, if you like that kind of stuff, which I do. Did you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's all I have to say.
It runs through December. I'll look at the schedule, but just for my
I don't
own.
remember.
Okay.
I think it's,
It was 10 classes, 10 classes. I think it was like last time, right? It was like 5 hours.
it's 5 hours with a break and
And it was 10 days. 10 days. But it was last time, yeah.
okay, 10/6 to 12/14 with the break for Thanksgiving. Wanted to be done in time for Christmas break, Christmas madness. So 10/6, 10/13, 10/19, and 20. So that's a full weekend. 26th and 27th is a full weekend. Then 11/2, 11/16, and 17 is a full weekend. 11/30, 12/7, and 12/14. So there's 3 full weekends. And then once a weekend meeting.
And if we can't attend the meeting, we can watch it online.
You can watch it online, and then, did this happen last time that groups got together to practice? I know you tried to have some people come.
Yeah.
I think you came to some.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we
that's
did
right.
have
We
that.
offered that. I'm
Yeah.
not sure.
Yeah, yeah, that was fun. I would do that again. I would do that again.
What did you offer?
Anybody that missed and wanted to talk in
Or just didn't
person,
understand.
or- yeah, oh, yeah, or just wanted to talk about stuff in class in person rather than there's something that you didn't hit right on
Yeah.
the tape, like, you know, you watch the tape
Right.
sometimes it's not the same. Yeah, that was fun.
And also to have somebody else watch your body. If you're
Mhm.
practicing alongside the tape, you may not, you still may not be doing it right. So it's nice to have somebody see you and say, oh, just do that. Just do it like that. And then questions are always welcome throughout. We do put together a Slack channel, a Slack channel. Yeah. And then people can ask questions on Slack and share resources, which I think is the most fun thing is when people share resources. Did you see this video? Or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.